So all of these experiences, like with every guest on this podcast, all of our experiences, it kind of comes together to lead the path that we eventually go down when we start our professional career or whatever that might be. So talk a little bit about how did this all formulate into creating Rewire Fitness? You mentioned that you met your co-founder in college, I believe, but how did all of this
not in college, whilst I was there.
I got it.
But yes.
Got it. So mention how all of this kind of came together and what was the road from after college to creating this company and kind of the obstacles or the things that you really were trying to emphasize and bring to the athlete or the consumer to help their performance.
Yeah. So when I met Son and Cody, they had just started developing a mental resilience training system. So using a brain endurance training protocol, built some hardware around it, or designed some prototypes, some hardware around it, and really focused on, building this mental resilience training system, which follows some super interesting science around sort of how we can train the anterior cingulate cortex for performance. And, it's built really on this original 2009 landmark study by Marcora, which highlighted the impact of mental fatigue on performance, which is very detrimental. It has a hugely detrimental effect to our performance. We all know this. If you finished a hard day at work, your workout's going to feel a lot harder than if you just, it's the first thing you've done in a day. And the science backs that up too. And it's because mental fatigue is having an effect on our perception of effort, which ultimately is the limiter to performance. So yes, they started building this sort of system around that. And that was around the time I met them and joined the team. And we started rounding it out into a really holistic system that spanned not only across training, but also looking at the recovery aspect and the monitoring aspect so that we could provide this really integrated system. Because then you've got something that monitors where you're at and knows the context behind what's the best thing in that moment. You've got something that helps you on the spot because mental fatigue is ultimately always going to be there. It's just about, and we need some on the spot strategies as well as a long-term training tool, which is our neuro training system. So kind of this three-pronged approach, which really spans all different aspects of fatigue.
Got it. No, that's really interesting. So you mentioned you joined their team and then you guys were working on this. Give us a timeline, like around when was this? And then how many years did it take you guys to kind of build it up to the start of Rewire Fitness?
Yeah, we were working on it for around 3 years before we launched the product.
Okay.
And launched it in September of last year. Had some really, really great feedback so far. Users seem to be loving it. Really, really positive so far. Some really exciting metrics coming out of it. And we just can't wait to bring it to more and more people because there's ultimately a hole for this. There's a huge problem around sort of mental wellness, highlighted over the last couple of years particularly, and we want to build solutions around that.
Let's dive into that. Okay, that mental resilience or mental mind-body connection a little bit more. So give us, in a big picture, I guess, give us some of the big things that you're looking at or what the research says to kind of improve, that resilience, improve that mental recovery of people so that they're more equipped to take on all of the physical demands that they need to do in performance and sports and all of that.
Right, exactly. So as I've briefly touched on, it really drives around perception of effort. So that's the key limiter when it comes to sort of the effect of mental fatigue on performance, because, I gave the sort of treadmill example, but that's the limiter. The science has shown it's not physiological mechanisms. It's around sort of perception of effort. So when you think you're at 10, you can't go any higher. If you are able to reduce that perception of effort, you're able to push harder. So really does drive around perception of effort. When mental fatigue is present in, a significant way, perception of effort gets higher and you get stuck. So when we look at sort of on the spot strategies, we're really looking at sort of how we can reduce mental fatigue, reduce perception of effort to better prepare you to perform and perform at a higher level. So, we're looking at strategies around self-talk. We're looking at strategies around visualization. We're bringing in some novel protocols like subliminal priming, where we're flashing positive imagery. We're looking at guided breathing techniques, which can be really interesting depending on the goal. You can achieve a lot of things. It's sort of this window into our or controller to our, Xbox controller to our physiology, because it's one of the ways we do have control over sort of our
Mhm.
heart rate or our, different mechanisms within our body, our parasympathetic, sympathetic responses. And it's like an Xbox controller for that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And also some really interesting techniques like binaural beats, which have been shown to reduce on-the-spot fatigue, mental fatigue. And we can select different frequencies based on goals. So be it physical performance, be it recovery, be it, physical recovery, cognitive recovery, spans a lot of different aspects there.
Got it. That's really interesting. I'm sure that, individuals vary a little bit with some of the responses. And I would guess that the more that you practice these strategies, the more effective they become, or the quicker that they kind of turn your mental fatigue or mental state around. But can you briefly explain, like, for someone like the average person, maybe when you use some of the strategies that are effective for you, how quickly are we turning around some of this mental fatigue or recovering mentally so that we can actually perceive less exertion and actually feel like, yeah, we're more equipped to take on physical demands. Our body physiologically can push harder. Like, give us a time frame when you say on the spot strategies, and like, what's the typical response that you would expect to see?
Yeah, so some of our sessions are like in the sort of 5 minute range,
Mm.
and they have a really significant effect. So people dropping their stress by 70%, they're 30% more ready for performance, they're 30% more focused. Really exciting stats from that kind of thing. So we can do some really short ones. Binaural beats as well. Sometimes we want to introduce a longer session. So we've got sort of like half an hour sessions as well around there.
Okay.
But yeah, most of our sessions are sort of in the 2 to 4 minute, 5 minute, time range. And it's really amazing what you can achieve in that period.
Yeah.
So really fascinating. So first our on a squat system, and then our sort of long-term neurotrain protocol is long-term. It's like training, like you're going to notice the effect after weeks and months of training, but ultimately it has a huge effect. So they did a 12-week study with amateur cyclists, and those that were using brain endurance training increased their time to exhaustion by 126%, and those that weren't in preset performance increased their time to exhaustion by 42%. So we're talking about like a 3x improvement on performance.
Yeah.
When doing the same kind of physical training, but just adding in a little bit of mental stimuli as well. And it's pretty incredible what you can achieve there.
Yes, it's remarkable. And there's so many different ways we can branch off of this. But before I forget this question, what this kind of reminds me of is, I think you guys take some of the strategies or intervention strategies research from, I believe, NASA, maybe Navy SEALs, and some of the high performance types of professions, right? Is that correct? Was it from NASA? And
yes, it's really interesting because a lot of these protocols have been used by sort of elite professionals and performers over the last sort of 20 years in some capacity, but our aim is really to bring it to consumer level. So box breathing has been used famously by the Navy SEALs. We're using some emotional questionnaires done by NASA or used by NASA. We're using binaural beats, which is, people used to have on CDs, and bringing that into a really accessible form for people. So yeah, really exciting way of just improving accessibility around these techniques and protocols, and also providing some context around it in terms of what the right solution is.
Yes, there's a lot of great things that you guys are doing and bringing it to the consumer level. And speaking back on, I think a while ago, many, many years ago, I read some kind of quote from a Navy SEALs, might have been out of a book or something like that. But Navy SEALs, it's just, they believe too that, your mental resilience or mental state, that's going to kind of dictate how much more you can push physically, right? And that's exactly what you're saying. This huge, like you said, it's a huge piece of the puzzle, but it's a very easy thing, I guess, to incorporate, because oftentimes when we think about physical adaptations, we're just thinking about like mechanics and physiology. We're not really thinking about the command center, the control center, your central nervous system, all of the emotional state, mental state. That can be a big factor into like even just pushing a little bit more each workout. And over time, that could lead to tremendous more improvements that we're not tapping into just because of our mental state, or we're not taking care of that mental recovery. So there's so many fascinating things here that you're sharing.